Hello and welcome to this week's edition of TRP News. I'm your host, James Andre, and here's what I'll be talking about this week. The budget, the Israeli election, Senator Tom Cotton once again is in the news, Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General nomination, and the human trafficking bill that is part of the holdup for Loretta Lynch's nomination. So first up is the budget. As you know, we've had a government shutdown in the past. There's been all sorts of brinkmanship going on, threats and legislation, and we won't put forward a bill without this, and I won't sign a bill if it includes that. And so that's currently what we're experiencing right now is a repeat of that. President Obama has promised that he will not sign any legislation that allows the sequestration to continue for another year, which, if you don't know, the sequestration is across the board budget cuts, I think around 10% across the board, that supposedly was put in place because supposedly no one would ever want that to happen, yet it ended up happening. And the president feels it's time for that to go away, that there's things that need to be funded, and his budget cannot accommodate that sort of, as they say, draconian budget measures. So if no agreement is reached, it's either a shutdown or a continuing resolution for another 6 months or a year or even a month. And if neither of those happens, or a continuing resolution will allow the sequestration to automatically return October 1st. So, as people are saying, Republicans want quote-unquote drastic cuts for food and education programs, but at the same time they want to increase defense funding more than the previous bill, more than the previous funding, and more than the president is asking for at this time. So that's kind of like they're saying one thing and doing another. Well, they don't want sequestration because they want to fund the defense industry more, but they want to cut everything else, such as food stamps and education programs, which is apparently fine with them, whereas the administration wants to do the opposite. Although they do have a small increase in defense funding, they do also want to fund investments in infrastructure, education, and other social programs to boost the economy and support the middle class. Now, this is going back to the whole Republican mantra about fiscal responsibility, and if I ran my business like the government runs itself, then I would be out of business. Well, the government is not a business. That's just a farce. The government can't be run like a business. And anyone who's owned a business knows that if you continue to just make random cuts, you cut your budget, you whittle away at programs in your business, then you end up with a business that looks nothing like the one you intended to have. You whittle away programs out of your business, you whittle away funding for products that you produce, and you end up being unable to produce those products. You end up closing the business. If it's not profitable, you close. Well, the U.S. government doesn't have that option. If the military is not profitable, you can't just close it and not defend the country. If the various other programs, if you want to take care of the veterans, if you want to take care of the tax collecting, these things have to be funded no matter what. They're not profitable to begin with. So the whole idea of running the government as a business is just a fallacy to begin with. So don't get fooled by that. The government is not a business. It does not run at a profit to begin with at the start. It doesn't sell products. It doesn't sell services. It doesn't sell anything. So there's no balance sheet. The only balance sheet is how much they take in and how much they expend. And the other thing is the value of assets is whatever the government decides it is. Yes, people say all the time, Well, they're just printing money. They're just printing money. Well, the money is based on the full faith and credit of the United States, our willingness and ability to repay any debts that are incurred. And there's no reason to assume that we won't repay debt. No matter how big the debt gets, the United States debt gets, it'll eventually be repaid. Now, of course, I'm not saying that we just shouldn't ever worry about the debt at all. But what I'm saying is that, it's not the same as a business. The debt is not the same as being in debt in business. The debt is part of operating a government where you have to provide services, and you have a changing population, changing demographics, and you're dealing with 300 million people. It's just and unexpected things like wars or whatever, or economic conditions changing, or there might be a drought, or there might be a hurricane. These things happen, and the government has to be able to respond regardless of whatever budget conditions or whatever the number, the debt or deficit happens to be at the time. So don't get sucked into that fallacy. It's not possible to know expenses exactly for the government. And agencies have a mandate to perform their functions, and it's not always possible to do that exactly within a specific budget. So as it stands now, Congress comes up with a budget that the president will sign, or it's a shutdown, or it's more sequestration. But just keep in mind that another thing to know about these budgets is it's not a mandatory spending bill. A budget is just a guideline, an outline, and then when it comes to spending the money, Congress has to pass appropriations bills. They actually have to pass a bill to actually spend the money, and ideally it's within the guidelines of the budget that gets passed. Well, that doesn't always happen either, as you know, otherwise we wouldn't have deficits or debt to begin with. So another fallacy there. Don't be fooled by this. People said, "Oh, Obama never had a budget, never had a budget, never had a budget." He had a budget every year. President Obama has had a budget every year, but President Obama does not write the budget. What President Obama does is propose a budget, and he sends it to Congress, and they have their own ideas about their budget, and then the House of Representatives has an idea, the Senate has an idea, and hopefully somewhere along the way they meet in the middle. But he had a budget. It just never, Congress was never going to pass it because there's too many Republicans who are going to stand in the way, filibuster it, and just not allow it to even come to a vote. Or it could have come to a vote, a Democrat could have brought it to a vote, but it never would have passed. So what's the point of sending it? Another farce there. Not only does the president's budget not have any force, but what's the point of sending it to Congress when it's just going to be voted down? So on a side note, the Office of Management and Budget just had a blog post out where they said that the Obama proposed budget, would reduce federal debt and deficit and over the next couple of decades. So his budget actually would, while it does raise spending, would actually reduce the debt and deficit, whereas the current policy would climb debt and deficit and debt to almost 150% of GDP, gross domestic product, by 2040. So the current policy is not working. We already know, we've seen in Europe, that the austerity measures just aren't the most effective way to resolve these things. The austerity measures, again, are buying into this fallacy of government as business, and it's just not true. So don't believe it. Don't buy into that. Fiscal responsibility is important, but at the same time, comparing a government to a business is just not an effective comparison to make. So that's what's going on right now with the budget. We'll keep you updated on what happens in any new developments, and we'll see where it goes from there. Okay, next up is the Israeli election. I've been talking a little bit about Bibi Netanyahu and his speech, and the fact that he gets most of his election campaign funding from the United States, and how he seems to be warmongering. We know he's bombed Palestine. We know that there are only two alternatives when dealing with Iran, and they're either negotiations or warfare. and he doesn't seem to like the negotiations. So where does that leave us? Well, the Israelis held their election, and they have a parliamentary system. So Bibi represents the hard right in the hard right party, and then there's the left wing party, and then there's a couple of smaller parties somewhere in between or on the outside even. Well, as you probably know by now, Bibi won the election. There was some curiousness going on with the exit polling and the polling. They said it was a close race, but apparently he won a decisive victory. So the right-wing ideals are what apparently the Israeli people want. And I mentioned previously that he had said some things about the Palestinians and the two-state solution being dead in the water, and he actually reiterated that on the election eve, saying that while he was prime minister, there would never be a Palestinian state. He also made some comments which people have taken largely to be bigoted about Arabs being bused to the polls, and how the right wing needs to come out and counteract their vote. So that's where he went. I can't say I'm surprised. I kind of had this, oppression, and maybe if you've watched previous episodes of TRP News, then you know that I'm not a huge fan of Bibi's, but apparently the Israelis are, and so it looks like he will continue to be prime minister. He still has to put together a coalition to govern and then be appointed prime minister. But as it stands right now, it looks like that's what's going to happen. So the things he said, the remarks about there being no Palestinian state, obviously annoyed President Obama and many in the Obama administration, and probably some of our European allies as well. So that's going to be an issue and has been in the news as terms of the U.S. administration's reaction to what he had to say. He has tried to backtrack a little bit about from such a hard line he took, but really, as far as I can tell, he's just a blatant liar. So, he'll say whatever he needs to say, and he's been dragging his feet on this two-state solution for a long time. I don't see why, personally, if you're going to do a two-state solution, then you can, if you're in the position of power, you can just say, well, here is your state, take it or leave it. And they haven't even gone that far. Even if it's not what the Palestinians want, it would be a state. You know what I'm saying? So if you really wanted a two-state solution, you could just dictate what that state would be. And if they haven't done that, so it's not likely that anyone ever wants to do it. So we're looking at this conflict going on in perpetuity, and that's the way it is, and apparently that's the way they want it. So this conflict between the U.S. administration and the Israeli government is probably first going to show up in the UN, where the United States, being on the Security Council and having veto powers over resolutions, has been covering Israel on several of these resolutions that have been coming out of the UN in regards to Israel and Palestine, and not allowing them to come to a vote, not allowing them to pass. And we may see that may not be the case in the future, so there may be some UN resolutions coming up that actually make it out and that Israel is not happy with. So we don't know for sure if that's going to happen, but that seems to be the most likely venue for the differences to start making themselves known. Now, I just on a separate note, I'm researching these things. I have been on several websites, and I've looked on several Jewish websites, and as a matter of habit, I tend to read comments on a lot of these websites, and I have to tell you that some of the comments are really, and they're echoing a lot of the things we're probably hearing from the right wing. They really are becoming sort of divisive and a little bit scary. Basically, that the supporters of Israel and people who are supporters of Bibi seem to have no room for negotiation, no room for reconciliation, and there can be no disagreement, and that's just the way it is, period. Palestine, Iran, and even as Americans who disagree with them are anti-Israel and really treated as mortal enemies. I'm reading a lot of the things these people are saying, calling the president anti-Israel, saying Iran, there can be no negotiation with them, there can be no negotiation with Palestine. And as I said, well, the alternative is just continuous warfare. So, thinking of Israeli bombing and blockading of Palestine, and it just comes to mind the possibility of political violence by Israelis and their allies. And, I hate to think of it, and I don't want to prejudge anyone, but the rhetoric is that strong and that scary. So on another, a little further aside, looking into that, I was like, well, these people are just so vehement and so virulent in their position. What are the possibilities of Judaic terrorism, of Judaic political violence? And a weird thing. So I got on Google and I started to research this, and violence by Jews, according to Google, doesn't exist at all. So you can check this out for yourself. You can Google Jewish terrorism, violence by Jews, Jews who commit crimes, criminal acts by Jewish people, and you will only find articles about violence against Jews. So I thought that was a really odd thing, and I ended up having to get on another search engine and try to research this further just out of curiosity, and I found a couple of interesting things. One thing I ran across was a quote from a man named Gerald Krafitz. Of all the areas of Jewish enterprise, notes Gerald Krafitz, none has been so overlooked as the field of crime. And it isn't because of a lack of Jewish criminality. For an introspective people, this oversight is significant. It is as if Jewish crime did not exist. An unsavory skeleton is best left in the family closet. The sociopathology of Jews is not an acceptable notion, since it runs counter to both religious precepts and preconceived ideas that Jews have of themselves. So this is apparently a Jewish guy who's saying this, and it's just odd because, as I said, there was nothing I could find, and I had to change search engines, change search terms to find it. And then another thing I ran across was actually, thinking about political violence, is that FBI records indicate that more terror attacks were committed by Jews than Muslims in the United States by a small margin. So that's an interesting fact that you don't hear anything about. One analysis shows that since 1970, Muslims have committed 60 acts of terror in the United States, while Jews have committed 118, so almost twice as much. So that's the FBI. This is not, somebody making this up. This is not a political, hit job. This is just the numbers that the FBI, independent or government organization, has come up with. So I just thought that was an interesting angle on the American-Israeli relationship and Jews both here and in Israel. And so make of it what you will. I'm not trying to paint Jews with a bad brush. But there is a lot going on politically, and as I said, when you say there can be no negotiation, what you are saying is the only resolution is bloodshed, which to me is sort of an anathema. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that there's always one resort ever, usually, unless your life is directly threatened, immediately and directly threatened. So that's just a little bit of information on that for you. And make of it what you will. Okay, next up is Senator Tom Cotton. I just wanted to talk a little bit about him once again, although I've been talking about him lately ever since the Iran negotiations, anti-negotiations letter signed by 47 senators. And as I pointed out previously, he's really what he's trying to do is get cozy with the defense industry, meeting with the legislative group of the National Defense Industrial Association, and he's also trying to get cozy with Israel, and possibly just to secure his political base and ensure his election, and eventually probably, I'm sure, he's thinking of running for president. So trying to get cozy with the defense industry, he's called for an increase. He's one of the senators calling for an increase in the defense budget. Just to put some numbers on that, I think I just mentioned that, we're talking about additional 20 or 30 billion dollars that the Republicans want to add to the defense budget. So we already are over, we're already in the mid or low to mid 500 billion. It might not even be. It's billions and billions of dollars, to paraphrase Carl Sagan. But there's billions and billions of dollars already in this, and they want to add a few more. The budget is in the trillions, but the defense budget is in the 500 billions, and they want to tack on another 20 or 30 billion. 34 more billion. And the proposed is 577 billion. So young Senator freshman Tom Cotton's first speech on the floor of the Congress, and he invoked Godwin's law and immediately lost the argument. If you don't know what Godwin's law is, that's the law that states that anyone who invokes Hitler automatically loses the argument. So to quote Tom Cotton, what he said was, Winston Churchill sounded that warning in 1933 as Adolf Hitler had taken power in Germany. Tragically, Great Britain and the West didn't heed this warning when they might have strangled that monster in his crib. Rather, they let the locusts continue to eat away at the common defense. So this is in regards to Iran and by extension the defense budget. So apparently we need to strangle Iran in its crib, although I'm pretty sure they've been around longer than the United States, so we'd have to actually go back in time to strangle them in their crib. But hey, maybe he's got a time travel device, so Lord only knows. But that's the rhetoric he's using. That's where his mind is at. These guys want to cut everything that's for the average citizen, you and me, but they want to spend money fighting these monsters, strangling them in their cribs, fighting overseas, and doing everything they can not to discuss anything with anyone that they don't agree with. Just another tidbit, so he's been tweeting, I mentioned in a past episode that he had tweeted the text of the Iran negotiation letter to several Iranian Twitter accounts, and he's been apparently trolling the supreme leader of Iran's Twitter account and cherry picking from there and saying one of the things he said was, why would we negotiate with someone who uses that kind of rhetoric? So he's quoting what he thinks are bad things that the supreme leader is saying. Of course, I looked through what he had to say, and I looked through what the Supreme Leader had to say, and what freshman Senator Tom Cotton failed to retweet or point out is the multiple tweets where the Supreme Leader said that there is no one in Iran who does not want to find a solution to the nuclear issue, that they do want to negotiate and they do think there is a solution possible. So that's what he's saying, multiple tweets. He does have some issues with what he calls American bullying and lies and fabrications, but he does emphatically state more than once that a negotiated solution is something that 100% of the people in Iran want. So don't be fooled again. These guys want to cherry pick and tell you, well, things are a certain way when they only show you one little corner of the picture. Take a look around. Yeah, you're not going to like everything everyone has to say. You're not going to like some of the rhetoric people use. But at the same time, actions speak louder than words. So just be cognizant of the fact that while People may not agree with the way someone talks to them. That doesn't mean they want to go to war. Doesn't mean they want to bomb them. Although people, a religious leader here in the United States may say all gays need to burn and go to hell. That may be just rhetoric. That doesn't mean they actually want to take someone, a homosexual, and burn them. Now, it's not agreeable. It's not something I would ever say. It's not something I would hope to hear in my presence. But at the same time, it's not the same thing as the action. That's why we have this, ironically, we have these Republicans talking about what people say, and yet they're supposedly huge proponents of the Constitution, which one of the things is we have a right to free speech. We have a right to speak what we want to say. We have a right to peacefully assemble and demonstrate. And so we don't act on people's speech unless it is slanderous or libelous or somehow damaging in some way. So just having rhetoric doesn't mean anything. These guys want to negotiate. They're saying they don't want a nuclear weapon. They say that they're close to a deal. So let's take them at their word. There's people in there monitoring things. There's negotiations going on as we speak. As I said previously in another episode, a lot of these guys actually have ties to the United States. They've been educated here. So let's not blow things out of proportion. Let's not build ourselves up into another war we don't need and we can't afford, either in money or lives. So that's where we are in there. I just wanted to make mention of that. And again, just to push back on this idea of how we need to go to war with Iran. For God's sake, let's take a break from the wars for a little while. We're still fighting with ISIS. Just to give you a quick update on ISIS, they were pushed out of Tikrit by the Iraqi army. So there's some success there. There's actually video of people dancing and celebrating the removal of ISIS from that one town. And I guess there's going to be some more offensives upcoming. So, and again, this is a joint operation, the Iraqi army, the U.S. military, Air Force, and the Iranian army. So there you go. We can cooperate. It's been proven. It's happening right now. So let's take the patient course. Let's take the logical course. Let's take the least bloody course we can. And if it comes down to it, no one's afraid to pull the trigger, I'm very sure. We've got enough war hawks to go around. So that's what's going on with Tom Cotton. And the last thing I want to talk about, a couple things here, is this Attorney General nomination of Loretta Lynch. Now, she's been languishing for 5 months, going on 5 months now, that she has not come up for a vote in the Senate for confirmation. She's been through the hearings, she's been through the questioning, both sides have looked into her, and no one has a bad thing to say about her. There's no criticisms, no questions remaining, yet they just won't bring her up for a vote or allow her to come up for a vote. Now, Loretta Lynch, it may bear saying, is a black African-American woman, and she's supremely qualified. She has a great track record. She's well educated. She's accomplished a lot in her life, and by all accounts will make an excellent attorney general. Yet somehow she can't get a vote in the Senate. Now, this is just an example of the GOP, how disingenuous they are. They've come up with an excuse after an excuse, and the current excuse is that we're going to hold the Loretta Lynch vote hostage until we get this legislation, human trafficking legislation, passed. So they've got this human trafficking bill that they're trying to get through, and supposedly, there's opposition to law against human trafficking. No, not really. That's not the case. So this is what I'm saying about disingenuousness, right? So instead of writing laws that are about one thing, that receive full debate and scrutiny, and that they have to answer questions about, they try to tuck this legislation, different legislation, into different bills, and it does different things. Now, if you read these bills, it gets very esoteric, and there's references from one bill. For example, they can put a bill forward today in 2015, and it might reference a bill written in 2014, which references a bill written in 2008, which references a bill written in 2000. So actually all these bills become one law, but you have to read through hundreds and thousands of pages to actually know what's actually allowed, disallowed, what everything refers to, and what technically is legal or illegal. So it's just this kind of lazy legislation, and these bills become so recursive that it's impossible to actually figure out what the impacts are. So just like they have the budget bills with language about the Affordable Care Act and immigration, which have nothing to do with the budget. It's just a trick to try to avoid a veto or force the president's hand or force Democrats' hand so that, oh, look, it's a sleight of hand. Hopefully no one will notice and they can get a bill or some sort of legislation passed. So the example for the human trafficking bill is a prime example. So what happened is, before this all happened now, they were holding it up supposedly so they could get this bill passed, which actually had Democratic co-sponsors. So what's the reason for holding it up? Well, they had the Democratic co-sponsors. They were holding up the Attorney General nomination, and so everything's looking fine. And then quietly in committee, they slip in some language, Hyde Amendment language, which is in regards to abortions. So here's the human trafficking bill. This is about saving women and children and men and people from being treated as slaves and preyed upon, and they make it about abortion. So what happened is that now the Democratic co-sponsors have withdrawn their names from the bill. And so here we are. Loretta Lynch waits again, and hopefully they do the right thing. Senators do the right thing. Get this woman in office. Human trafficking is an issue for the Attorney General to oversee. In fact, the Attorney General is mentioned in the human trafficking legislation and has a lot of responsibility under this bill, and yet you won't let the Attorney General take office. It makes no sense. So about this human trafficking bill, I'm a little skeptical of it. Some of the language, I'll tell you a little bit about the Hyde Amendment language in a second, but so most of the bill is fairly innocuous. It cleans up language in other bills. Again, that recursiveness I'm talking about. Nearly half the bill refers to other laws that are already written, have been on the books since I think as early as 2006, possibly 2004. These bills have already been on the books. These laws have already been on the books, and this bill is going back and modifying those laws. And now the dispute is over, in particular, this Hyde Amendment language, which is, I'll read it to you, is, first of all, in the human trafficking bill, it says that all funds dispersed under this bill must be treated under the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014, which is Public Law 11376. So that the Consolidated Appropriations Act, Section 506 and Section 507, which is what they're referring to, which is the Hyde Amendment language, says that Section 506, none of the funds appropriated in this act and none of the funds in any trust fund to which funds are appropriated in this act shall be expended for any abortion. None of the funds appropriated in this act and none of the funds in any trust fund to which funds are appropriated in this act shall be expended for health benefits coverage that includes coverage of abortion. So not only can you spend money on abortions, you can't spend money on insurance that has it within its benefits coverage for abortion. So now imagine this, okay, so you're talking about human trafficking in this bill, which goes back to several laws that are already on the books, several departments and agencies that are connected to this legislation, and and victims from around the country and even around the world. And now you have to go and make sure any benefit you give them does not somehow connect to the possibility of someone getting an abortion. So if that's not onerous on itself, I don't know what is. But reading further in the language, which is where I say I'm a little bit skeptical about it, is that one of the titles in the bill is Victim-Centered Child Human Trafficking Deterrence Block Grant Program. So what a block grant is, it's just a block of money that's devoted, that gets spent on various programs in support of one initiative, which in this case is deterring and human trafficking and assisting the victims of human trafficking. Well, it turns out if you read the bill, there is assistance for victims, but if you read this section, Victim-Centered Child Human Trafficking Deterrence Block Grant Program, you'll find that the money is mainly earmarked for law enforcement. It goes to law enforcement salaries, law enforcement training programs, creation of law enforcement initiatives. So this money is not directly going to victims of directly to supporting victims of human trafficking. It's going to supporting the law enforcement agencies that are investigating human trafficking, which it seems like crime falls under, right? Crime is crime, so shouldn't we just be worried about funding them in general? Why is it part of this bill? And then when you do get to the part where the money actually goes to the victims, what you see is a lot of language about court-mandated programs, court monitoring. Basically, there's a lot of restrictions on on these victims' behaviors, what they have to do. They have to be, audited. Like, are they spending the money properly? Are they showing, there's attendance requirements. It's like, so not only were they like subject to the whim of someone else who took away their freedom, but now this law wants to establish programs to make them their freedom subject to courts or other government agencies. So I'm a little skeptical about it. Crime to me is crime. Kidnapping is kidnapping. Rape is rape. So this whole, I can understand language clarifying laws that are on the books, but when you create these programs to fund law enforcement agencies that it's already their job to stop this stuff from happening, it just seems a little fishy to me. And so the Hyde Amendment language is in there. They slip that in on the sly, and and they even, and let's call it what it is. They lied to the Democratic co-sponsors. They said that their aides told them that, hey, no, there's not going to be anything like that in there. We're going to leave that out, because what has been happening since 2008 or somewhere around there, this language has been attached to almost every bill, every spending bill that comes up. Basically, Section 506, Section 507. You can't spend money on this. Money can't be spent on abortion. This money can't be spent on abortion. This has been upheld by the Supreme Court, and they just try to tack it into every bill that comes up. Well, the Democrats are starting to finally put their foot down and say everything isn't about abortion. This is human trafficking. But the Republicans just can't pass a clean bill. They're, let's face it, they're lazy legislators. They don't have a strong coalition. There's the crazy right and the hard right, and then just the plain right, and they can't come up with an agreement. They don't even, speaking of the military spending, they can't even come to an agreement on that. You've got fiscal hawks in the Republican Party who are saying to the military hawks, hey, that's too much money. We're not supposed to do that. In fact, you've got people in the Republican Party who want the sequester to continue. So these guys don't know what they're doing. They're not only trying to slip one over on the president and over on the Democrats in the Congress, they're trying to slip one over on the people in their own party. So that's the state of affairs. These guys, and not only that, you take this language, it's just like bad programming code. Someone, instead of writing a fresh program, they just and then we have libraries, they're programming libraries just for this thing, but they're hackers that just take code from other programs and slap it in and use it for them their own purposes, and sometimes that code is not good, and you can't find the bug in the program. It does things you don't expect, and these guys are just slapping language into bills. They're putting things about abortion, things about the Affordable Care Act, things about food stamps, things about law enforcement, and they're just tacking it into any bill that comes up. And what that means is sloppy legislation and legislation that we don't know the full impact of until years down the road. And not only that, they're wasting your time and your money. So, this all goes back to don't let this slide. Don't be suckered into, their rhetoric so they can say, hey, we passed a budget bill, but it's a budget bill that was, half of it was about abortion. Yeah, they passed a budget bill, but that budget bill was a bunch of malarkey, and it's not something you want to actually have become law. So don't buy into this, and listen, get out there and speak up about this stuff, man. If nothing else, your friends and family, again, get them, make them aware of what's happening, and understand that, again, you need to go out and vote. You need to know what's happening in your community, and you need to not take everything at face value. Also, try as a progressive, try to be understanding and tolerant. Try to listen, ask questions before you make judgments. That's what we're talking about, whether it's homophobia or racism or any kind of bigotry. Try to understand a little bit. If you're not being directly, immediately injured by someone or something, take 10 seconds to try to make sure you understand where someone else is coming from. And try to understand what someone's saying. Don't buy into the rhetoric about, hey, we passed the budget bill, but we didn't tell you about all the bad things that you don't want to have that are in it. Hey, Iran, called us bullies, but you didn't say anything about how they're really saying that everyone wants a solution to the nuclear problem. Iran can't be trusted, but you're not really saying that the alternative is that we all go to get into another war. So have a questioning mind, get out and vote, speak up about what you believe. Because right now, these guys are controlling a lot of things, and we're going to end up with a lot of results that we won't know the full impact of for years and years to come. All right? My name is James Andre. This is TRP News. I want to thank you for watching, and have a good one.